The courtroom smelled faintly of polished wood and stale coffee. My heels clicked against the marble floor as I walked to my seat, silk blouse hugging me in all the right ways, reminding me that I belonged here, even if they didn't think I did. My name is Samantha Hayes, and right now, everyone in this room expects me to be a mess.
Broke.
Fragile. Helpless. Then it happened. My ex's lawyer, a smug man with a perfectly trimmed mustache, leaned forward and said it, loud enough for half the courtroom to hear. She's broke. She can't even afford a home or decent food and clothes. I felt the burn in my chest, a mix of anger and amusement. Really? That's what they thought I was. A penniless girl clinging to scraps of life. My hands rested calmly on the table, my nails freshly painted, not a tremor to betray the storm inside. I let a slow smile form, a smile they'd never see coming. The judge barely glanced up, the ex shifted in his seat, and I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the polished wood of the witness box. A woman poised, composed, and utterly in control. None of them knew what I had built while they assumed I was collapsing. And in that moment, I promised myself something fierce. I would let them feel the truth. Not by shouting it, not by pleading, but by simply letting them witness my reality. I still remember the summer I turned 21, sitting on the cracked vinyl couch in my tiny apartment, staring at the faded wallpaper and wondering if I had made a mistake leaving home. My name back then was Abigail Monroe, though no one called me that at the time. Everyone just saw the girl they assumed couldn't survive on her own. I had argued with my parents that morning. They didn't understand why I wanted to leave the house I grew up in, the neighborhood I'd known all my life. They said I was reckless, selfish, and naive. My father's voice shook with frustration, my mother's eyes brimmed with disappointment, and their words hit me like 1,000 small daggers. You'll regret this. You can't even take care of yourself, my mother had whispered, voice trembling but cutting through me sharper than any shout. I clutched a small, worn-out leather journal in my hands, a gift from my grandmother. She had written inside, "Strength isn't always loud. Sometimes it's in the quiet steps you take when everyone doubts you." I traced the words with my fingertips, feeling the truth in them, feeling her faith like a tiny ember in my chest. Tears stung my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. My hands shook, my throat tightened, yet there was a flicker of something else, determination. I packed my few belongings into a battered suitcase, some clothes, a handful of books, my grandmother's journal, and the little money I had saved from part-time jobs. That day, I stepped out of the front door and didn't look back. I was scared, yes, but I was also beginning to understand what independence meant. Owning your choices, even when the world insists you're fragile and incapable. I walked into the unknown with nothing but hope, grit, and the quiet promise that one day, those who doubted me would see the woman I was becoming. Leaving home had felt like stepping off a cliff, but somehow I landed. My name was now Olivia Bennett, a reinvention of the girl who had been told she couldn't survive. The first months were brutal, bouncing between part-time jobs, sleeping on second-hand mattresses in cramped apartments, and learning the painful lessons of managing money I barely had. But every evening, when I pulled out my grandmother's journal and reread her words about quiet strength, I felt a flicker of hope that slowly turned into determination. I found a mentor, a woman named Claire Dalton, sharp, unapologetic, and wildly successful in the marketing world. She saw something in me that I hadn't fully seen in myself, the hunger to rise, the willingness to grind, the creativity that refused to be ignored. Claire took me under her wing, and I soaked up every lesson: how to pitch clients with confidence, how to read people, how to turn setbacks into strategy. Some days I'd leave her office feeling like a failure, my stomach knotting with doubt, only to wake up the next day ready to fight again. The early wins were small but significant. Landing my first freelance client for a modest sum felt like winning the lottery. The first time I made a profit that covered my rent, and then some. I cried quietly in my apartment, clutching a cup of lukewarm coffee, the smell grounding me in reality. I learned to budget, to invest carefully, and to prioritize building something lasting rather than chasing fleeting comfort. What I loved most, though, was keeping it all secret. I never posted glamorous updates on social media, never bragged to anyone who might have doubted me. I smiled at family messages, feigned struggle when asked about my work, and let assumptions run wild. Little did they know, each success was a quiet rebellion, a way of saying, I can do this without you, and I don't need your approval. Years passed. The freelance gigs turned into contracts. Contracts turned into partnerships. Olivia Bennett became a name quietly respected in her industry, though almost no one outside my office knew the truth. I furnished my apartment with pieces that reflected my personality. A vintage armchair from a thrift shop, abstract art I'd fallen in love with, photographs of travels I had taken on weekends. Every object reminded me of the path I had walked, of fear, struggle, and resilience. And all the while, the courtroom words from years before haunted me. The whispers that I was broke, fragile, incapable. They fueled me, more than any anger or pride could, because I knew one day those assumptions would crumble under the weight of what I had quietly built. I had survived. I had thrived. And I had no intention of letting anyone see me as small ever again. The courtroom was colder than I remembered, but I didn't feel it. My name today is Madison Clark, a name that carried every ounce of the woman I had become. They thought they knew me. They thought I was struggling, broke, invisible. And now they were about to find out how wrong they were. My ex sat across the room, smirking like he'd won before the fight even started. His lawyer, the same smug man who had called me broke, glanced at me with an air of superiority. He had no idea what was coming. I walked to my seat, heels clicking against the marble, silk blouse crisp, hair perfectly in place, eyes steady. I let a subtle smile play on my lips, calm, controlled, almost cruel in its quiet confidence. The judge called a hearing to order, but I barely noticed. My focus was on them, watching, anticipating the moment the truth would settle like a weight in the room. Then the lawyer spoke, repeating the words I had heard before in hushed tones, as if the repetition could make them true. She can't even afford a home, or decent food, or proper clothes. I let the words hang in the air for a beat longer than necessary. The murmur of the courtroom faded into background noise. I leaned back slightly, letting my eyes sweep over the room, letting them take it all in. The ornate chandeliers reflecting off-polished wood, the leather-bound law books, the gleaming courtroom plaque with my name nowhere on it, yet. Finally I spoke. My voice calm, controlled, unwavering. Actually, I own 3 properties across the city, all fully paid for. My company has grown beyond what most people in this room could even dream of. I employ over 50 people, and yes, I do afford food and clothes. Decent ones, in fact. The room went silent. My ex's jaw tightened. His lawyer's smirk faltered. I watched their faces shift from disbelief to shock, then to a subtle shade of guilt. Some of the family members present had never imagined I could succeed this way. Some had laughed behind my back. Some had pitied me. I let my eyes settle on the polished wood table in front of me, imagining the tiny Abigail clutching her grandmother's journal years ago, trembling yet determined. And now here I was, Madison Clark, not just surviving but flourishing. I opened my laptop on the desk, sliding financial statements across for the court to see. Not for bragging, not for vengeance, but so that truth, undeniable and vivid, could speak for itself. The whispers started, quiet at first, then spreading like wildfire through the courtroom. My ex's lawyer shifted uncomfortably. My ex's smirk had vanished entirely. Eyes widened, breaths hitched, and some simply looked away, unable to face the reality. I didn't gloat. I didn't laugh. I let the silence and the undeniable evidence do the work. Every painting on the wall, every designer accessory subtly visible, every document I presented whispered the story I had lived quietly for years, a story of resilience, hard work, and triumph over doubt. In that room, I wasn't the girl they had mocked. I wasn't broke. I was every woman who had been underestimated, every girl who had been told she couldn't, and every survivor who refused to be invisible. And I let them feel it fully, completely, and without a word more than necessary. The courtroom had gone quiet, but I could feel the tension like electricity in the air. My name now was Harper Mitchell, and the woman sitting here was in full command of her life. For years, they had assumed I was powerless. Now the balance had shifted, and I held all the cards. I looked first at my ex, his confidence drained, his smirk nowhere to be found. "You'll need to understand something," I said calmly, letting my voice carry across the room. "Your assumptions no longer define me, and your actions have consequences." The lawyer raised an eyebrow, but I didn't falter. I slid a neatly organized folder across the table, not just evidence of my success, but terms for how I would interact moving forward. I wasn't cruel. I wasn't petty. I was strategic, compassionate, and firm. To my ex, "If you want any part of this settlement handled amicably, you will treat all negotiations professionally. Any past manipulations will not be tolerated. And therapy for yourself isn't optional. You need to face the patterns you refuse to see." To my family members who had doubted me, "If you want to be part of my life, you must recognize your past mistakes. No more belittling comments, no undermining my choices. Support isn't passive, it's active. If you want a relationship with me, it comes with accountability and change." And to the lawyer, and anyone who thrives on underestimating women, assume nothing. Respect must precede judgment. I paused, letting each statement sink in. I could see it in their eyes: disbelief, shame, a flicker of understanding. For years, I had been forced to measure myself against their low expectations. Now I set the standard, and it wasn't negotiable. I could feel a subtle warmth spreading within me, a mix of satisfaction and clarity. This wasn't about revenge. This was about reclaiming power and ensuring growth, mine and theirs. They had underestimated me. They had assumed weakness where there was strength, dependence where there was independence. Now the rules had changed. I added one final condition, one that I knew would sting but was necessary. Anyone who wanted to benefit from my guidance or presence would also have to embrace self-responsibility.
No.
Excuses. No hiding behind past grievances. Growth demanded effort, and my compassion didn't extend to complacency. I watched them squirm under the weight of my words, but I could also see the beginnings of change, the flickers of recognition that the past could no longer dictate the present. For the first time, I realized the true power of setting boundaries. It wasn't control for the sake of control. It was liberation, for both me and those willing to rise. In that moment, I wasn't just Harper Mitchell. I was every woman who had been dismissed, every girl told she couldn't, every voice that had been silenced. And now, I spoke not only for myself but for them, setting the stage for healing, accountability, and growth. The weeks that followed were quieter than I expected, but the change was real. My name now felt like Ella James, the final iteration of the girl who had once been underestimated, dismissed, and labeled broke. Slowly, I watched the people in my life respond to the conditions I had set, not perfectly, not instantly, but with effort. My ex started therapy, awkwardly at first, but genuinely. I could see the shift in his eyes when he finally admitted patterns he had long ignored. My family began to apologize in ways that felt sincere, taking small steps to rebuild trust and understanding. And the lawyer who had mocked me? He stopped underestimating women, quietly acknowledging my competence in ways that felt almost surreal. I sat in my office one afternoon, sunlight spilling across the vintage armchair I had picked out years ago, and I held my grandmother's journal in my hands. The words she had written so long ago: "Strength isn't always loud. Sometimes it's in the quiet steps you take when everyone doubts you," felt heavier now, richer, more profound. Every decision I had made, every lonely night, every small victory had led me to this point. I reflected on the journey, the trembling hands of Abigail Monroe leaving home, the endless nights Olivia Bennett spent learning, hustling, and dreaming, the courtroom revelation as Madison Clark, the unwavering assertiveness as Harper Mitchell, all culminating in Ella James, fully herself, unashamed and unapologetically empowered. I smiled quietly, thinking about the people who had doubted me. I didn't feel revenge anymore. I felt relief, clarity, and freedom. The courtroom, the battles, the assumptions, they were all behind me. I had transformed pain into growth, rejection into independence, and judgment into a catalyst for my rise. I placed the journal on my desk and looked out the window at the city I had built my life in. The streets below were filled with possibilities, each one a reminder that strength and resilience aren't about proving someone wrong. They're about becoming exactly who you're meant to be, whether anyone believes it or not. And as I sipped my coffee, letting the aroma ground me, I whispered to myself, a final voiceover line that captured everything. I wasn't broke, I wasn't weak, and I wasn't waiting for anyone to see me, because I had already built my life on my own terms.